This presentation is about some key ideas and concepts in Edmund Burke's political philosophy. Edmund Burke was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1730. He left Ireland in 1750 to settle in London, where he frustrated his father's plans for him to study law and turn to writing. He became a member of the House of Commons in 1765 under the patronage of the Marquis of Rockingham, a leading member of the Whig Party. He remained active as a politician until 1794, playing a leading role in the major political issues of the period, both as a politician and philosophical analyst for his party. He died in 1797. He dealt with an astonishing range of social and political issues, but his core concerns were the abuse of the Crown's authority in Parliament, the oppression of Irish Catholics, the conflict with the American colonists, the abuse of British power in India, and the impeachment of Warren Hastings, and the threat of revolutionary abstract theory driving the French revolutionaries. Mixed in with these concerns were his ideas about party politics, the economy, and the government's financial management. Burke gave speeches in Parliament and sometimes wrote lengthy pamphlets in which he was often forced back to fundamental philosophical questions to defend his political positions. These included questions of epistemology, the nature of reason, metaphysics, natural law, positive law, freedom, the prescriptive nature of custom and tradition, and what it means to be a people. The general task of the Edmund Burke Society is to analyse and discuss Burke's philosophy and to apply the conclusions to current political issues and competing political theories. In particular, the Society concentrates on explicating the following key ideas and concepts which are supported by quotations from Burke's speeches and writings. Together, these ideas and concepts encapsulates Burke's particular view of the extent of knowing and reasoning in politics. Burke's speeches and writings are extensive. This 12-volume set here behind me, including an index, originally published in 1887, does not contain everything by far. There is, however, a canon, so to speak, in which Burke's most important ideas are laid out. Amongst those are the Reflections on the Revolution in France, 1790, An Appeal from the New to the Old Whigs, 1791, Observations on a late publication entitled The Present State of the Nation, 1769, A Letter to the Sheriffs of Bristol, 1777, Tracts on the Popery Laws, 1765, and Speech on Conciliation with the Colonies, 1775. First, Burke's view of abstract theory in political discourse. Abstract theory. Abstract theory has limited application in the concrete circumstances of political problems. First, abstract theory sunders the link between the multifaceted and multi-layered concrete circumstances of every political issue and sound analysis. Second, the individual reason is limited and fallible. Individual reason simply cannot grasp the full extent of any given issue. Third, there is a stock of third-person knowledge in settled social and political arrangements that politicians would ignore at their peril. Fourth, political problems are about seeking the good for society. They are not about the truth of abstract propositions. Finally, there is some inscrutable guiding element operating below the surface of individual reason that results in the rational order. American thinker Leo Strauss captures the idea with, quote, "Good order or the rational is the result of forces which do not lend themselves to good order or the rational." The following quotations illustrates these points. From a notebook of Edmund Burke, this is his early writings, 1750 to 1756. There is his youthful writings. "A man who considers his nature rightly will be diffident of any reasonings that carry him out of the ordinary roads of life. Custom is to be regarded with great deference, especially if it be universal custom. Even popular notions are not always to be laughed at. There is some general principle operating to produce customs, that is a more sure guide than our theories. They are followed indeed often on odd motives, but that does not make them less reasonable or useful. A man is never in greater danger of being wholly wrong than when he advances far in the road of refinement, nor have I ever that diffidence and suspicion of my reasonings as when they seem most curious, exact and conclusive. From his satire, A Vindication of Natural Society, from 1756, the design of A Vindication of Natural Society was to show that without the exertion of any considerable forces, the same engines, meaning abstract theory, which were employed for the destruction of religion, might be employed with equal success for the subversion of government, and that specious arguments might be used against those things which they, who doubt everything else, would never permit to be questioned. It is the business of the speculative philosopher to mark the proper ends of government. It is the business of the politician, who is the philosopher in action, to find out proper means towards those ends and to employ them with effect, as from the Thoughts on the Cause of the Present Discontents from 1770. And from the speech on the petition of the Unitarians in 1772, I never govern myself, no rational man ever did govern himself by abstractions and universals. I do not put abstract ideas wholly out of the question, because I well know that under that name I should dismiss principles, and without the guide and light of sound, well understood principles, all reasoning in politics, as in everything else, would be only a confused jumble of particular facts and details, without the means of drawing out any sort of theoretical or practical conclusion. A statesman differs from a professor in a university. The latter has only the general view of society. The former, the statesman, has a number of circumstances to combine with general ideas and to take into consideration. Circumstances are infinite and infinitely combined, and are variable and transient. He who does not take them into consideration is not only erroneous but stark mad. Here Burke quotes a Latin saying, dat operam ut cum ratione inseniat, which he translates as, he labours to make his mind unsound by means of his reason. He is metaphysically mad. And finally, from an appeal from the old to the new Whigs in 1791, political problems do not primarily concern truth or falsehood, they relate to good or evil. The next concept is political reasoning and human nature. Political reasoning must always start with people, or more precisely, with how people are, the knowledge gained from observation and long experience. Political reasoning is not a linear mathematical process divorced from the people who make up the political issue. These thoughts are illustrated in the following quotations. From the observations of the late publication entitled The Present State of the Nation in 1769, whether all this can be reconciled in legal speculation is a matter of no consequence. It is reconciled in policy, and politics ought to be adjusted not to human reasonings, but to human nature, of which the reason is a part, and by no means the greatest part. And from the speech on conciliation with America, abstract liberty, like other mere abstractions, is not to be found. Liberty inheres in some sensible object, and every nation has formed to itself some favourite point, which by way of eminence becomes the criterion of their happiness. And from Burke's letter to the young man Dupont in 1789, you have theories enough concerning the rights of men. It may not be amiss to add a small degree of attention to their nature and disposition. It is with man in the concrete, it is with common human life and human actions you are to be concerned. And from his masterpiece, The Reflections on the Revolution in France in 1790, I have endeavoured through my whole life to make myself acquainted with human nature, otherwise I should be unfit to take even my humble part in the service of mankind. And finally, from the Reflections on the Revolution in France, the nature of man is intricate. The objects of society are of the greatest possible complexity. Next is the concept of moral prudence. Because political problems are concrete and complex and man's reason limited and fallible, the politician, who Burke calls the philosopher in action, is called to apply his prudential judgment. In Burke's terms, prudence is the sorting of the moral and political data and is more than the notion of expedience, that is, choosing on the basis of utility. The following illustrates. From his speech Remarks on the Policy of the Allies in 1793, circumstances perpetually variable, directing a moral prudence and discretion, the general principles of which may never vary, must alone prescribe a conduct fitting on such occasions. This is one of the most important quotes from Burke on the question of moral prudence, and it's worth repeating. Circumstances perpetually variable, directing a moral prudence and discretion, the general principles of which never vary, must alone prescribe a conduct fitting on such occasions. The idea of applying objective general principles in the many details of the circumstances is a common refrain in Burke's writings. And from the letter Sir Hercules Langrist in 1792, for you know the decisions of prudence, contrary to the system of insane abstract reasoners, differs from those of the judicature, and that almost all the former are determined on more or less, the earlier or the later, and on a balance of advantage and inconvenience, of good and evil. From the Reflections on the Revolution in France, political reason is a computing principle. Political reason is a computing principle, adding, subtracting, multiplying and dividing, morally and not metaphysically, true moral denominations. Again from the Reflections, old establishments are tried by their effects. If people are happy, united, wealthy and powerful, we presume the rest. We conclude that to be good from whence good is derived. In old establishments, various correctives have been found for their aberrations from theory. Indeed, they are the result of various necessities and expediencies. They are not often constructed after any theory. Theories, rather, are drawn from them. In them we often see the end best obtained, where the means seems not perfectly reconciled to what we may fancy was the original scheme. The means taught by experience may be better suited to political ends than those contrived in the original project, those contrived theoretically. And finally, from the second letter on the Regicide Peace in 1796, the rules of prudence are formed upon the known march of the ordinary providence of God. The next concept is natural feeling. Prudential judgment is not a mere process of weighing up the different options in varying circumstances and making a choice about what is most expedient. It also entails a moral judgment calling on one's natural sympathies and feelings. The part natural sympathies and feelings play in political judgment is a crucial element in Burke's thought. From a notebook in 1756, metaphysical or physical speculations neither are or ought to be the grounds of our duties, because we can arrive at no certainty in them. They have a weight whenever they can concur with our own natural feelings, very little against them. From an article in the Annual Register in 1759, the happiness or misery of mankind estimated by their feelings and sentiments, and not by any theories of their rights, is and ought to be the standard for the conduct of legislators towards the people. And from a letter to the sheriffs of Bristol in 1777, It is melancholy as well as ridiculous to observe the kind of reasoning with which the public has been amused in order to divert our minds from the common sense of our American policy. There are people who have split and anatomized the doctrine of free government as if it were an abstract question concerning metaphysical liberty and necessity, and not a matter of moral prudence and natural feeling. From the first letter on a regicide peace, the wise legislators of all countries have aimed at improving instincts into morals and at grafting the virtues on the stock of natural feelings. From an appeal from the new to the old Whigs, with such things, revolutions, before our eyes, our feelings contradict our theories, and when this is the case, the feelings are true and the theory is false. From the Reflections on the Revolution in France, man is by his constitution a religious animal, and atheism is against not only our reason, but our instincts, our feelings, in other words. Finally, from the Reflections, this sort of people are so taken with their theories about the speculative rights of man that they have totally forgot his nature. Without opening up one new avenue to the understanding, they have succeeded in stopping up those that lead to the heart. They have perverted in themselves and in those that tend to them all the well-placed sympathies of the human breast. And now the concept of the natural law. Throughout his speeches and writings, Burke appeals to a superior law, a universal law, or what is termed the natural moral law. This is an area of controversy in the critical literature. Burke's appeals to a universal law are variously described as persuasive rhetoric, a Lockean idea of natural law, a Thomistic concept of natural law, or they are dismissed as posturing, overblown rants. The Society of Edmund Burke firmly believes that Burke subscribed to a Thomistic notion of natural law, and that notion underpins all aspects of his political philosophy. The natural law supervises the conclusions of political reasoning in which human nature and natural feeling play an essential role. The following illustrates. From the tracts on the Popery laws in 1765, the true weakness and opprobrium of our best constitutions is that they cannot provide beneficially for every particular case, and thus fill adequately to their intentions the circle of universal justice. Again from the Popery laws. But if we could suppose that such a ratification, that is of a bad law, was made, not virtually but actually by the people, not representatively but even collectively, still it would be null and void. They have no right to make a law prejudicial to the whole community, even though the delinquents in making such an act should themselves be the chief sufferers by it, because it would be made against the principles of a superior law, which is not in the power of any community or of the whole race of man to alter. I mean the will of him who gave us our nature, and in giving impressed an invariable law upon it. Again from the Popery laws. All human laws are, properly speaking, only declaratory. They may alter the mode of application, but have no power over the substance of original justice. And from the opening of the impeachment of Warren Hastings in 1788. When Warren Hastings claimed arbitrary power in dealing with the Indians, Burke thundered, "He have arbitrary power, my lords the East India Company have not arbitrary power to give him. The King has no arbitrary power to give him. Your lordships have not, nor the Commons, nor the whole legislature. We have no arbitrary power to give, because arbitrary power is a thing which neither any man can hold nor any man give. No man can lawfully govern himself according to his own will, much less can one person be governed by the will of another. We are all born in subjection, all born equally high and low, governors and governed, subjection to one great, immutable, pre-existing law, prior to all our devices and prior to all our contrivances, paramount to all our ideas and all our sensations, antecedent to our very existence, by which we are knit and connected in the eternal frame of the universe, out of which we cannot stir. This great law does not arise from our conventions and compacts. On the contrary, it gives to our conventions and compacts all the force and sanctions they can have. It does not arrive from our vain institutions. Every good gift is of God. All power is of God, and he who has given the power, and from whom alone it originates, will never suffer the exercise of it to be practiced upon any less solid foundation than the power itself. Finally, the concept of freedom. Burke's ideas on human reasoning, political prudence, natural feeling and the natural law lead him into his ideas about freedom. Burke is rightly considered the father of modern conservatism, but he was known in his day as a defender of freedom. Even today there are those that reject the tag of conservative and claim Burke was a liberal, understood in the classical sense. It is understandable that many of his contemporaries considered him a liberal because for much of his political career he defended the British Constitution against those abusing its authority, namely the Crown. He carried a vigorous fight to those encroaching on the freedoms already established in British society. His ideas about freedom and protection of the Constitution especially came to the fore in the American issue, in his defence of the American colonists. He defended the American colonists because the British government and the Crown were denying the Americans their rights and freedoms as enshrined in the Constitution. Our Constitution had formed over the centuries. This is the reason Burke can be called a conservative, that his ideas of freedom fit into a conservative conception of society. If freedom depended on society's arrangements as reflected in the Constitution, then that society's order of arrangements must be defended at all costs. The crucial point is that without order and the means to protect that order, there can be no freedom. The next quotation is one of the most important passages in all of Burke's writings. It distinguishes the Burke conservative from the liberal and from all forms of libertarianism. It's from an appeal from the old to the new Whigs. The distinguishing part of our Constitution is its liberty. To preserve that liberty inviolate is the particular duty and proper trust of a member of the House of Commons. But the liberty, the only liberty I mean, is a liberty connected with order, and that not only exists with order and virtue, but cannot exist at all without them. It adheres in good and steady government as in its substance and vital principle. And from the speech on conciliation with the colonies, abstract liberty, like other mere abstractions, is not to be found. Liberty adheres in some sensible object, and every nation has formed to itself some favourite point, which by way of eminence becomes the criterion of their happiness. And from a letter to the sheriffs of Bristol in 1777, civil freedom, gentlemen, is not, as many have endeavoured to persuade you, a thing that lies hid in the depth of abstruse science. It is a blessing and a benefit, not an abstract speculation, and all the just reading that can be upon it is of so coarse a texture as perfectly to suit the ordinary capacities of those who are to enjoy and of those who are to defend it. Far from any resemblance to those propositions in geometry and metaphysics, which admit no medium, but must be true or false in their latitude, social and civil freedom, like all other things in common life, are variously mixed and modified, enjoyed in very different degrees and shaped into an infinite diversity of forms, according to the temper and circumstances of the community. Finally, from the reflections on the revolution in France in 1790, but what is liberty without wisdom, without virtue? It is the greatest of all possible evils, for it is folly, vice and madness without tuition or restraint. Those who know what virtuous liberty is cannot bear to see it disgraced by incapable heads on account of their having high-sounding words in their mouths. There are, of course, other important issues arising from Burke's speeches and writings. For example, of hardly less important are his ideas about individual subjective rights and the constitution of state and society. The ideas above and their interpretation form the core of the Edmund Burke Society's views about Burke and his thoughts, and will be further unpacked in following presentations.